Hello, welcome to the Praying Christian Women podcast. I am Alana here with Jamie. How are you, Jamie?
I am good. How are you doing?
I'm good, fighting a cold. So if I start coughing or have I have these like huge sneezes with this one. So
Oh,
thankfully, right now it's almost all just in my head. As in, not I'm making it up,
it's
but
all in your head, Alana. You're not really
you,
sick.
I'm not really sick. No, but I definitely feel like I'm a little hoarser than normal. How are you doing?
Mhm. I'm doing well. I might be a little bit hoarse too because we were doing some drywall stuff in the basement. My husband was installing some speakers in the basement walls, and I'm the drywall person. I have over the years I think it was ever since we got our very first fixer-upper back in Virginia, I have
Mhm.
been the drywall person. So I have really, that's one of those little known facts. I can repair some drywall. I
That's
can do
impressive.
texturing. I actually learned a new kind of knockdown texturing that I was able to master, and it's my best wall yet. There were
Aw,
speakers that had to be taken out and patched over, and you can't even tell. I'm so proud. Like it's
that's pretty impressive.
yeah. So I'm the drywall person. But drywall, we didn't wear masks, so we should have probably because now we've got
You're
like the
just inhaling a lot
lifelong
of dust. Is that what it is?
a lot of drywall dust, yeah, and
Yeah.
sanding and stuff like that. But other than
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, and I've been singing in the car a lot.
Well, that's
There's
fun.
that. Yeah, yeah. Really loud singing in the car. Yeah,
Sounds very fun.
yeah. So we're both hoarse for different reasons.
Yeah, your reasons. I don't know if it sounds fun or see to me like doing any home repair stuff does not sound fun. Singing in the car I'm okay with, but
So this is a total aside for anyone interested in health benefits. I
yeah.
actually started singing. So I was on the worship team with our church in Arizona, and
Mhm.
I love singing. I enjoy singing. I also enjoy when no one else is in the car belting out a song with the rest of
Mhm.
them. But I actually read that loud singing can actually stimulate your vagus nerve, which is good for all kinds of things. But you have a vagus nerve, vagus nerve, and gargling can also help stimulate this nerve. But so can loud singing or yelling, like that kind of thing, like a kid
Yeah.
screaming at recess or something. But anyway, I just was like, why not? I just hadn't, I realized
Fun.
I had not done that in a while. So I put on some praise and worship music and some country music, and I've
Uh-huh.
been singing loud, but I think it's taken a toll on my voice.
That's hilarious.
But my
No, I've
vagus
heard
nerve is
some.
happy.
No, I've heard studies too about singing and its health benefits. And I know, in addition, I hadn't heard the one you were talking about, but like it helps with your breath control, stuff like that. And then also singing in groups like you do in church. There's a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
cool physiological improvements that happen through corporate singing, which is fun.
That is very cool. And that goes back to there's just so much in the Bible that is, I won't even say that the things that we're told to do, don't give up meeting together and
Mm,
corporate praise and things like that, those are for their own reasons, but there almost are these compounded benefits that are
yeah.
purely physical, transcend that spiritual and communal element. So cool community element.
Yeah, exactly. That was a terrible segue into our topic today. I'm glad we planned that out.
Yeah. Next time I'll do a little more digging there to get something more relevant. But
No,
um,
I'm the one who
God,
always asks how it's going. But yeah, I do think it's cool though that, yeah, even if you do not believe in God, even if you are not saved, if you follow certain biblical principles, I think there are benefits that you experience in this life. I don't think that's a reason for us to be obedient to God, but I think it's a nice extra cherry on top.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I am excited to continue on in our Proverbs 31 mini series, and we have been talking about how does the Proverbs 31 woman pray? What are some of the biggest ahas that you've experienced as we've been talking through this so far?
I would say definitely just the the idea that we don't have to be all of the things perfectly,
Mhm.
that this is to, if especially if we're looking at this as a celebration of womanhood and
Yeah.
not a checklist of all the things that you have to do well. It transforms us. And the talking about singing in the car is a little bit of a segue into just this picture of God rejoicing over us with singing and singing this
Mhm.
over us, just like the congregation would sing this over the women back in the day, like we were talking about
Yeah.
before. Um, that God is singing this over us, like rejoicing over his beautiful creation of womanhood and celebrating the entirety of womanhood, but then also our unique place within it that doesn't have to and shouldn't look like everybody else or anybody else. I love
Yeah.
that. It's freeing.
It really is. Yeah, I find it freeing too to remember that this is, like you said, it's a celebration. It's not a prescriptive how to. There are definitely prescriptive applications, but this is not God coming down with his rubric like a middle school teacher has. Oh, you did 4 paragraphs. I told you to do 5 paragraphs. So now I'm taking you from a B to a C.
And I'm a lists person. I like having a checklist so
Uh-huh.
that I know where I stand. I can see the progress. So it does make
Mhm.
it more difficult. And we could have probably a whole other podcast series or episode at least on how your learning style or your strengths
Yeah.
impact the way you read and interpret scripture, especially this
Yeah,
one.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. And remembering what it was written for. This wasn't written as a how to be a good wife to a woman. This was written as a man repeating advice his mom gave him about looking for a wife. And that really
Mhm.
changes it as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm excited to jump back in. Today we're talking about Proverbs 31. We're starting in verse 18 and 19. It says, she sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. I always picture, anytime I hear spindle, I picture Sleeping Beauty.
Me too, because that was when I first learned what that was. When I was just like,
Uh-huh.
she pricks her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel. I
Yes.
remember that. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I'm excited that we get to dive into this as a just for fun, since it's pertaining to her lamp does not go out at night. What is the longest, if you know it, or one of the longest periods you've gone without sleep?
Oh, yeah. I'm pretty sure it would have been, there have been several. I'm thinking of all-nighters that I pulled in college. That
Huh?
definitely was, I can remember being the most tired. But also when we traveled to Australia and we were traveling back. I just seem to
Oh,
remember that, and we had little kids, and I did not sleep on the plane really. And then we
mm,
had a layover in LA, and I seem to remember, I'm sure that I have gone like a full day, full night, and then not gone to sleep until the next day. But
to the
that's
next
as
night.
long
Yeah.
the next night. But that's
Yeah.
as long as I've ever gone. How about you?
I don't even know that I've gone that long, at least not without a couple catnap snoozes. Definitely there's some traveling times, but I usually will sleep some on the plane. I remember in college, I was always so like working ahead and such a reverse procrastinator that I almost felt left out that I never experienced the entire like all-nighter thing. And so I was a junior and seniors had to turn in their final paper a week early because of grading and graduation requirements and things like that. The rest of us had 5 extra days. And the book that I needed for research was late, like shipping to me. And so I got it the day that the seniors needed to turn their paper in. And so I told myself, this is my chance. I'm going to be an overachiever. I'm going to stay up all night. I'm going to read the book. I'm going to write the paper and I'm going to turn it in by the senior deadline, even though I didn't have to. I made it to 9 o'clock and I was like, I'm tired. I think I'm going to go to sleep now. But there was one night in college where I did stay up all night and then I had to catch an early morning flight. And I'm guessing I probably slept at least a little on the plane, but probably no more than like a total of an hour, maybe two, then stayed up the whole day and went to bed the next night. So when I worked for the school newspaper, I had trained my replacements. So this would have been this must have been like spring break of my senior year. So I had already trained my replacements. The people who it was going to be the person who was replacing me, this was going to be the first of our weekly newspaper that she was going to handle entirely. And it was around 7 at night, and all of your proofs had to be in by 1 or 2 in the morning to get to the printer to be in the stands by the following morning. I wasn't even obligated, but I was still in the habit, so I checked my editor email account to find her email saying, "I think this is gonna be too much. I'm resigning, sorry." And so I had to show up at 7 at night, scramble to get an entire section edited, formatted, laid out, copy edited. And then I was flying out. I think it must have been flying home for spring break or something the next morning. But again, I can sleep in a lot of places. So I'm sure I slept some on the plane.
Yeah.
Do you want to open us up in prayer and then we can dive more into this spindling and everything else we'll be chatting
Yes.
about?
Let's do it. God, we just thank you once again just for this passage of scripture as we unpack it and talk through it and talk through the implications in our current world and society. We just pray for your guidance, for your wisdom, for your Holy Spirit to just bring to mind for each of us the things that you have for us in this passage. We just thank you so much for the gift of scripture, that we can read these words directly from you to us. And thank you for the celebration of womanhood and the celebration of who each of us is individually, as well as who we all are collectively as sisters in Christ. Amen.
All right, so we start with verse 18 in Proverbs 31. It says, "She sees that her trading is profitable." So this kind of goes back to what I thought last week's episode was going to be more about as a celebration of women in business. Since we didn't talk about that a ton and that episode went in a lot of other different directions, let's just take a minute. Like I think it's great that we now live in a society where it is more common for women to be involved in business. I will make the caveat that I think it's also sad that more moms are working out of the home out of necessity when they would prefer to be home. But so there is absolutely a double-edged sword. I would say in my ideal world, a woman could be working out of the home and loving it and crushing it and be applauded for it and not feel guilty and not feel shamed. And a woman could choose to stay home and not have it be like a weird thing. Or so what do you do all day? Like that was a question I got asked a lot when Scott and I got married because for we got pregnant pretty quickly, but there was a time I was basically a stay-at-home wife and I worked like 1, maybe 2 afternoons a week outside of the home. And people would ask, "So what do you do all day?" And I'm like, "I'm really busy. Like I'm helping my husband with ministry stuff. I'm doing stuff in the home." So it is weird that as in we consider it weird sometimes for somebody to not be hands-on active with kids and not working a full-time job, which again, it goes back to what we talked about before. Like, it's a pity that our society does place a monetary value on what you do as a way to measure your worth. But that would be my ideal world. And you and I have both had a mix of different types of jobs. Like the only thing I've never done the typical 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I think, if I remember it, I think the only full-time job I had was right after college when I worked at the girls' home, and that was different because that was like a residential ministry, so you didn't really clock in and clock
But you
out.
also never clocked out. Yeah, you're like always on call,
It's like the Hotel California. You can, how does it go? You can check in anytime you want, but you can never
but you can
leave.
never check. Yeah, you can never leave.
When you look back at the different roles that you've played in and out of the workforce, what are some of the things that you enjoyed about the different seasons that God brought your way?
So I absolutely, I love working outside the home. Like
Hmm.
I told you, I'm a lists person. I love the
Hmm.
feeling of productivity. So ever since I was young, I wanted to get a job when I was 15 and my parents had to sign
Hmm.
off or get a work permit or something. I love doing jobs outside
Hmm.
the home, and I enjoyed the seasons of working before kids. I worked as a lab technician. Oops, sorry. I don't know if you guys
What
heard that. I
happened?
just
No, I
whacked my
didn't hear it.
keyboard. I'm
Oh,
moving my hands all around here, and so I whacked my keyboard. But I
and you were
loved,
a very clumsy lab technician.
I I might have been. I
I
might
was
have
actually, when I
broken a few
TA'd,
beakers and flasks. I don't know. I don't know.
I went
That's
through
it
a
may
season
have.
in college when I TA'd for a chem lab, and I had a month period where 3 out of the 4 weeks I ended up like burning myself on something. So,
Yeah. No, I'm actually in our home. I'm notorious for breaking things.
oh no.
Yeah. Yeah. Our son, one of our kids actually gave us a set of, I don't know what they're made of, stainless steel glasses
Huh?
because he was like, Mom, this is so that you don't break them. Like, you'll never break
Oh,
these. Not in a mean way. He was very sweet
yeah.
about it. But
Yeah.
anyway,
It's a
but
thoughtful
I
gift.
love science, love being a lab technician. And I also have had jobs working at vet clinics as vet technician before kids. And I loved all of those times. And then when I had kids, I at times had part-time jobs outside the home through church ministry. Loved that season of having more flexibility because they were very, I could bring my baby into the church
Hmm.
office in the playpen and get
Yeah.
work done. Like that was very fulfilling and fun. What I didn't like, you didn't ask me this, but what I have not liked is, like you said, when you have a necessity to work and your heart is at home. And I did
Yeah.
have a season of that where I think it was a lot of things all at once, but I was working outside the home, had a young kid. This is when our oldest was in preschool, and I took a job at the preschool working pretty much so we could afford preschool. So he could
Yeah.
be at the preschool
Uh-huh.
for free. Plus I got money, which was great. But we became dependent on that income. I
Hmm.
loved the people there. I loved working with the kids, but I did not love, my heart was like the whole time I was there, I was thinking he was in a different class and I'm thinking I should be doing this stuff that I'm doing with these other kids, my own
Mm.
kid, and my heart was not there. And I got very depressed about it and upset about it.
Hmm.
And there was a season where I was working outside of the home, but my heart was not in it. And I wished not
Hmm.
to be. And I think that's what you're talking about is that.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there have been times, including right now. Right now, I'm in a season where all my kids are in public school or off at college during the day,
Hmm.
and I don't have a job outside of the
Hmm.
home. This
Hmm.
podcast is my job right now, which I love being able to do
Hmm.
that. And so, yeah, I have had a lot of different kinds of work versus no work. But
Yeah.
I will say that I struggled mightily going from having kids, working two part-time jobs in Arizona, coming to Alaska, having no job, and having kids at home. I struggled with the idea that being at home with my children and raising my kids and keeping my home was enough after coming down from the having jobs with kids. And
Yeah.
so I think there definitely can be guilt, there can be discontentment in different stages and phases of working or not working on
Mm.
all sides of the spectrum, depending on pretty much anywhere you land, you could find a reason to feel guilty if you wanted
For
to.
sure.
But I
Hmm.
had to do some self-examination and really just think, why am I feeling guilty about this? Is this because
Hmm.
there is an expectation that God has on me that I'm not fulfilling? Or is this like a pride issue or an
Hmm.
external issue of someone putting pressure on me or myself putting pressure on myself or society?
Yeah.
So, anyway, how about you?
I was thinking when you were talking about that season when you were in Anchorage and went to being just at home with the kids and how that was a hard transition for you. And I did just in air quotes. I realize that might not have come across in
No, but
in a
that's,
podcast setting, but
and I hope that mine didn't come across that way either because the just is very air quotey because that
yes.
job is of ultimate importance.
It is. However, I also want to posit that if you were to compare the life of a stay-at-home mom, let's call it like 100 to 150 years ago, like picture who we hold up as an ideal, like farmer wife, frontier woman, in addition to focusing entirely on her kids and on her household and on the crops, she was also in a community. And when
Mm.
you got to Anchorage, you didn't have cousins and aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas. And so part of your struggle could have additionally not just been, I am not bringing in an income, therefore I feel less important, or I am not involved in ministry, therefore I feel less important. It could have also been, I'm not connecting with people like God designed me to. And I think that's the hardest part about stay-at-home moms today is the connections are so much harder to make because a lot of us, and I don't have statistics, but I would guess it's more abnormal than not, at least, and this is coming from someone who's lived in Alaska. It's definitely the norm here. It is more normal for a young mom in Alaska to not have extended family nearby. And people move and people come and people go. So, like, I was raised by aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas, and there were 9 cousins, and we got
Mhm.
together. It felt once a month or something at minimum, and then we would
Yeah,
do
me too.
weeks at Aunt Carol's house and weeks where a bunch of the cousins stayed at grandma and grandpa's. And a lot of moms today don't have anything even remotely similar to that.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. Another facet of that is really interesting. We just moved, as I've mentioned about 70,000 times. As I was unpacking some of the things in our bedroom, I came across a bunch of journals. And of course, I got sucked in for
Uh-huh.
about an hour reading one of my journals. And it happened to be the time when we had first moved to Alaska, which was very interesting. And
Mm.
I had completely forgotten the perspective because I've talked a lot about that restlessness and the egg McMuffin that I just was like, God,
Yes.
help me find somebody to give this egg McMuffin to. And I even mentioned it in the journal. And
Oh,
and there was no one to give the egg McMuffin to. I knew there
uh-huh.
had to be someone hungry and I had the egg McMuffin. Anyway, but what I missed, like what I have forgotten about that time, and now that I have the perspective, so I I became pregnant with our third child like around the beginning of, so like just a few months after, like couple of months
Mm-hmm.
really after we moved to Alaska. So we moved in October. I think it was about late December or maybe early January that I got pregnant with Eva. And so when I look at some of that, like some of that actually overlaps when I was pregnant. And it's very interesting to me, the things that I wrote. And it also, some of that led into the time that I began writing, that I met you, and you
Yeah.
encouraged me and helped me to write my first book and
Mm-hmm.
self-publish it. So a lot of that restlessness, a lot of my words were, God, what are you, are you calling me into something? Like, what do you have for
Yeah.
me? So some of that restlessness that I misplaced in terms of trying, just grappling at anything that would give me meaning. Some of
Mm-hmm.
it was really good because it was preparing me for the things that were coming. So I think some of the
Yeah.
restlessness with a void of ministry and like just some of the journaling that I did, I really believe was God building up something in me, almost, I don't know, almost like when you need to fill up a receptacle fully before
Yes.
you can pour stuff out of it. He was filling me with all of this like energy
Mm-hmm.
and vision and need to give, to pour out so that I would have what I needed when it came time
Mm-hmm.
to write that book. And another very interesting thing is in that restlessness, I was writing things and I'd forgotten about this, but I was like fixated on our spare bedroom. And I was just writing, I just feel like there's something with our spare bedroom. I feel like there's maybe a woman with a little girl, like a woman, a single mom with a
Mm-hmm.
child. Are we supposed to adopt a
Take
child?
someone in,
Are we
yeah.
supposed to take someone in? Like, I'm getting emotional because our daughter was, she was not a planned pregnancy. She was
Right.
more than that. She was a surprise, the best surprise of our whole life. I found
Oh.
out the week that this is maybe TMI, Matt, I hope you never listen to this and know that I told the world, but the week that my husband was going in to get a vasectomy, I found out I was pregnant with our daughter. And the
Uh-huh.
way that I even checked, because I had no reason to think there was a reason, was
Uh-huh.
that he woke up one morning with this like crazy premonition and just said, "What are the chances that the week I go in for a vasectomy that you're pregnant?" And I said,
Uh-huh.
"No, there's no way." Calculated these things and there's just not a
Right.
way I was pregnant.
Uh-huh.
And I look at all, and it was so weird that I had this picture in my head of a mom with a baby
Yeah.
girl. And
You
that
were
was
the
me.
mom.
I was the mom and she was my baby. And that was why, and
Oh,
we ended up using our spare bedroom for one of the boys. So she had a room. So, anyway,
yeah.
all of that to say, I know this is a long winded way of saying, if you're feeling restless, if you're feeling guilty, if you're grappling, God is maybe working in something long term for you. The guilt is misguided. The grappling is maybe just your way of sending feelers out and figuring out what it is that God has for you. But if you're in a place, even when I was struggling with working and feeling called home, there was an opportunity that came my way to work at our church and in that office where I got to bring my baby when I was pregnant with after I was pregnant with him. So I don't know, just if you're in a place of discontentment with your work or anything like that, remove the guilt because that is not of God. Remove the shame, remove the whatever, but find out like, am I supposed to be here? Am I putting other people's expectations on myself? How can I serve well where I am right now? And what are the clues and the stepping stones that God's putting in front of me that are showing me maybe what He's calling me into? Maybe He's filling that vessel with discontentment and restlessness because there's something coming. Just pray that you don't miss that and be open
Mhm.
to it. Try to remain as content as possible in God's goodness and provision, and knowing that even if you don't know right now why you're feeling that way, maybe you will in a couple of months or a few months.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with your feeling of that vessel needing to be filled up. And that's exactly how I feel just about with every single book. And there is this sense of longing and yearning and discontentment. And I can,
Gestation,
it is, it's like labor pains. It's like the early labor pains where, no, this is not ready to be birthed yet. You've just got to carry it.
yeah,
And it can be uncomfortable and there's longing there. There's something about the journey, but I would always rather have the finished book in my hand than that feeling of restlessness. But I also feel like sometimes Christians get a little hoity-toity about that stuff, and they would say, Jamie, you should have been content with who you are in Christ because that's always enough. And I think on the super cerebral theoretical, that has some merit. But in the practical, we were made to feel like we were making a significance. We were made to be in a community with others. Solitary confinement is considered to be the worst form of torture, right? Far worse than physical torture. And so I don't, I want to just repeat what you said that the guilt can be so misplaced. So maybe you're single and really longing to be married and you're beating yourself up because you're like, why can't I be content with God? And there's absolutely, yes, be content with God. But perhaps He did create you to desire to be married, which
right?
He probably did. Or if you're trying to conceive and it's not working, and I think about what Hannah's husband told her in the Old Testament, aren't I enough? Aren't I as much as a son to you? And okay, yes, you can love your husband, but that's not the same as having a baby in your arms. And don't beat yourself up for the yearning because there are certain desires or callings, or let's just call it a destiny that God has put on us. And if you just say, oh, I should be content whether I'm writing a book or not, then okay, theoretically, like I said, can a Christian learn to be content in any and every situation? Sure, Paul did. But that doesn't mean that if you're sensing that you're not there yet, you're sensing that God has something more for you. That doesn't mean that you're too ambitious or too self-centered or things like that. And I think that sometimes we as Christians use this idea of being content in Christ alone as an excuse to keep each other small. Jamie, why are you dreaming of being involved in a ministry? Who do you think you are? Or that kind of thing. And that's really sad. I think that a lot of us miss out on the fullest realization of our callings and destinies because we tell ourselves, oh, I should be content with just Christ.
Yeah, when I was writing that book, I remember one person who consistently was I don't want to say a naysayer, but
Oh
just always
no.
constantly challenging me
Mhm.
why are can I just ask why are you writing this book?
Oh
And
man. Or like, why do
um
we need another book about?
and then it was
Yep.
like why you and why are you writing this book when there are a lot of like famous people that are way more
Wow.
credentialed? Not
Yeah.
in that, basically that's what this person said. It's like why
Hmm.
you and like
Who do you
why.
think you are?
That's how I took it and received it. And at the time, I don't think I gave a good answer. I think I pretty much was like, just because I just feel like I'm supposed to, I guess. But what I should have said was the truth, which was God is calling me to do this thing,
Yeah.
and I'm just being obedient. I don't know what he's
Amen.
going to do with it. I don't know what his plans are. I don't know
Hmm.
why my perspective is any different from anybody else, but there's some reason, and I'm okay with not knowing that.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm better than anybody else because I think that was what this person was getting
Hmm.
at is, do you think you're better than
Wow.
us who are not writing books? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yikes.
Like,
I am so mad on your behalf.
I, at the time, felt ashamed and
Hmm.
small. And now
Yeah.
I do feel like a little bit of righteous indignation of who are
Hmm.
you to tell me
Yeah.
what God is calling me to do? But on the other
Hmm.
hand, you can't let other people, especially if you're a people pleaser like me, you have to fortify yourself. And I think reminding yourself, even if everybody around you is naysaying, reminding yourself that the
Hmm.
only person whose voice matters is God.
Yeah.
And I would say there is a caveat and always another side of the coin where if you're like, let's say for instance, you are a stay at home mom and you are involved in some kind of like multi-level marketing or something like maybe like I did Pampered Chef at one point in my life, Pampered
Hmm.
Chef or Mary Kay or one of these things that you can do from home, doTERRA. And let's say there's a conference coming up for
Hmm.
people and you've brought in zero money from this endeavor, which my own experience with Pampered Chef is I love the products, I love doing the parties, but I wasn't a very good salesperson. So I was lucky to break even, which was fine. It was good. But let's say you ask your husband, hey, I want to pursue this dream of Pampered Chef and I want to go to their conference in San Antonio in the spring. And he says, I'm sorry, but we just don't have the money for that. And I just don't feel like the income is there for
Hmm.
travel to do that. But you just say, I'm not going to let anybody tell me any different. And I'm going to go out and buy some new dresses and run up a credit card and take the trip and go. I mean, I would say, there are definitely times to run with your dream. And there are other
Hmm.
practical steps within running with that dream that I do feel like deserve a little bit more grace and consideration. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It
I'm
totally
not
does.
advocating being irresponsible with finances or
Yeah.
irresponsible. Yeah, you get what I mean.
No, I'm the same. I love the like old school stories of missionaries who just save up to buy the ticket and show up. But in a modern day setting, like that kind of scares me. Like a 20-year-old girl will be like, hey, I got my ticket to like such in the Amazon. And okay. It is so funny that you went to MLM because that is exactly where like before you even segued into MLMs, I was like, I should bring up the multi-level marketing thing.
Okay.
I was thinking about that last week in last week's episode. We were talking about different ways that women might find themselves in victims of financial abuse or financial exploitation or victims of scams. And sadly, and I know that this is going to not resonate with some in our demographic, but some of the MLMs are pretty predatory in their marketing and in their messaging and even in their structure. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying that it's wrong for any women to be involved in something like doTERRA or things like that, but as entities, I think that what they do is they take the woman whose biggest pain point is exactly what you and I were talking about. I want the best of everything. I want to be home with my family and I want to be killing it in business and I want a community of other women and business owners. And those are beautiful dreams. But the nefarious side of these corporations is they know that only a very small fraction of people make money. It's a case of the house always wins. So if you go
Yeah.
into Pampered Chef because you're like, this sounds really fun. I want to support my friend who wants me to sign up under her. I like the idea of having an excuse to get to throw a little party. And yeah, it'd be
And
great
I
to get
get
a
50%
discount.
off my
Yeah,
stoneware.
I would love a discount on these products I love. I think that's a great reason to go into it. But you also needs to be very respectful of the people who don't want to be involved in that. You need to be respectful if you're trying to get someone to sign up under you and they say, no, we can't afford that. Don't come back with the 10 excuses that your MLM has given you as a script. And so I think that I just last week when we were talking about just some financial warnings, I kept thinking about it afterwards. I'm like, you know what? It sounds so bizarre, but I really do feel like MLM should be in there because they target young moms who have a dream of improving their family situation. And most of the people who buy in, and let's say the typical MLM has at least a $500 buy-in to get started, most people don't see that back, right? Just remember, the house always has to win. Otherwise, these businesses don't exist. So if you're going to go into something like that, go into it with your eyes wide open. Do it because you love the product, you want the discount, you think it sounds fun to hang out with your friends. If you make money, cool. And also be careful about bringing other people as a young homeschooling mom in the early like 20 teens, I fit the demographic. Like I should have been a doTERRA woman, but like we were so poor at that point, I couldn't even afford the buy-ins. No one even bothered to ask me. And I would go to my homeschool co-op and if there's a room of 12 women, 10 of them were doTERRA or some type of essential oil distributors. And I remember feeling left out because that's the other thing is these corporations know that moms are yearning for that kind of community, like we talked about.
And the
If someone,
conferences where you have an excuse
yeah,
to travel and dress up, feel
mm-hmm,
beautiful.
yes. So if you can afford it and if it's fun for you and if you're not hurting the people under you or pressuring people, go for it and God bless you and have a ton of fun. But if somebody had really pressured me, like it would have been the worst financial decision for our family for me to buy into something like that. And I would have been tempted because I would have yearned, I wanted to be one of the cool moms who sold the essential oils,
Yeah.
but we literally could not have afforded it. And so be careful about again, it goes back to when we talked about in Proverbs 31, how she brings him good and not harm, and how we can extrapolate that to not just our interactions with the husband, but with everyone we come across. Okay, are you doing good? Not harm. Let's say you find out that the product that you've been selling to all of your friends, let's say you discover it actually is a subpar product. At that point, I do feel like it's your responsibility to pull away. Or I had a friend, we were very close, and she got into a supplement MLM, and it turned into every conversation she would try to sell me stuff. So I say, I
Yeah.
need your prayers. I'm feeling so discouraged and so depressed. So I have just a thing for you. And it didn't destroy our friendship in terms of there was a huge falling out and like we got into this big fight and I said, don't ever talk to me again. But there was absolutely a pulling away because it would be like if you and I were talking and 90% of what I told you was how you had to go and buy this product.
It cheapens the friendship
It can.
and it can damage it. I've had things like that as well where and I have to while we're talking about this when I was doing Pampered Chef, I found my mindset shifting in the way that I viewed my friends because I really
Yes.
wanted to have parties. And there was one
Yeah.
friend in particular that I thought, if I could get that friend to have a party, ooh, that would
Hmm.
open up so many doors with all of these people in this
Hmm.
certain employment space that I thought would be
Yeah.
great people. And she was really resistant to it. And I got pushy. And
Yeah.
I look back and I think, and she never did have a party because she really
Hmm.
didn't want to, but I got a little
Yeah.
pushy and I didn't like myself in that respect. And please don't think, I think Pampered Chef products are great. I loved what I
Yeah.
did, loved doing the
Hmm.
parties, and I had a blast. I would never go back and do it differently, except I would put a guard up over my mindset when it came to interacting with people because if at any point in anything that you do, you're looking at people in a predatory way,
Yeah.
like they're your
They're your,
meal ticket, that can get dangerous. But again, there's balance in everything. But I appreciate that you went into some of that because honestly, another brutal, honest observation is that MLMs prey on churches. They are, I think, instructed if you don't already go to a church, go to a church. Some of them, not all of them. Pampered
yeah.
Chef never
Yeah.
told me this, but I know there are some that say if you don't already attend a church, find one and find a big one because that's a great
Yeah.
place to meet potential customers. And yeah, just go in with your eyes open. But it goes back to this verse 18. She sees that her trading is profitable. Is your business venture your writing? When I first started writing my book, there were expenses that had to be paid and I had to talk
Mm.
with my husband about, you know
Yeah.
what, publishing this, I'm going to need a few $100s for cover art,
Yeah.
and I wasn't bringing in money. So I had to
Hmm.
ask, kind of, can we take this out of our family's funds to invest in this? There were conferences I would have loved to have gone to that just weren't in our budget, and you
Yeah.
could get carried away with writing or podcasting or
Mhm.
anything that seems very worthwhile and absolutely could be a calling from God. Just make sure that your trading is profitable. Or if it's not, sometimes you have to make initial upfront investments for things to pan out in the long run, but don't be entitled and expect that if you're part of a partnership of
Right.
finances.
Yeah. I think that's really smart. And yeah, it takes discernment to know, like for a married woman, and you go to your husband and you say, "Hey, I want to take this much money out of the family budget so that I can go to this conference or so that I can start this business." And your husband comes back, is that's a terrible idea. It takes wisdom to know, is this God closing a door because my husband knows that this is going to be something that's going to maybe suck me in, the worst of the predatory MLMs? Or is this a dream squasher that I do needs to find a way to rise above? And in almost every case, I don't think that's going to mean going behind your husband's back, right? Or anything like that. But what I did, because I had book cover expenses and editing expenses and software expenses, and we had no money. And so that's why I started doing the homeschool clubs I used to do. And it turned into, okay, so a couple days a week, I'm going to have these homeschool kids over. We're going to do like math club and science club, and I'm going to get paid for that. And that money is going to be what I fund my writing with. But I think there's an opposite side of that when we talk about her trading as profitable. Let's say that you're not like pinching every single penny. And let's say that you want to write a book and you spend a few $100s on the cover and the edits, and then maybe you spend another few $100s to go to a conference, and maybe you spend like a couple $100s to get it promoted on these sites. And let's say you only sell 5 copies. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've sinned, right? The
Or even
outcome.
that isn't profitable in the eternal
Exactly.
sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or Scott jokes. So I had my biggest garden harvest this year, and it was still pretty puny. I got one beautiful head of cabbage, one pretty tiny head of cabbage. I got about 30 cherry tomatoes, most of which are still green and are ripening in the house, and then a couple random things. That's my biggest outdoor garden success to date. We could look at the couple $100 I spent in supplies and soil and seeds and seedlings and be like, that was ridiculous, right? Like we could have bought every single one of these things at the grocery store for 25 bucks. But I enjoyed it. And so sometimes we can even look at, like when I coach authors, there's a segment of authors who are hobby writers. They're a lot of times like they're post retirement, they don't need the money, they just want to have the book out and they're willing to pay $1,000 for people to help them. And of course there are the organizations that prey on those kinds of people, just like an MLM would. So it
That's a
really
really
does.
good, I'm glad you
Mhm,
touched on that too, because
mhm,
there are, in the publishing world, there is some predatory
mhm.
activity.
Yeah, yeah, I think there is in just about every sphere, I would guess. And again, it's part of being a good steward. I've gotten into, as a branch off from listening to true crime, I've been listening to different podcasts that are more specific about scam artists and con artists.
Oh, wow.
And one of the rules is if you think you're smart enough to never be scammed, you are more likely to fall for something. So the best way to protect yourself from getting scammed is to recognize that anybody could fall victim to something. So I think again, it comes back to asking God for discernment,
Mm.
not being so bullheaded that you just get one thing in mind and you're like, I am going to invest in this startup no matter what anybody else says. But you also need to know maybe you do have a dream that needs some money to get started. And maybe that is your calling and you needs to rise above some of the naysayers. And Jamie and I can't tell you which side of that fence you fall on. That can only come through prayer and discernment and feeling things out. But I do think it's wise to go into anything with this idea of nobody is too smart to fall for a scam.
Yeah. No, that is very good advice. It's like cheating when they tell you you first get married. Don't ever assume your marriage is impenetrable to cheating or immune
Hmm.
to cheating,
Mm-hmm.
or that you, just
Mm-hmm.
because you're a Christian couple,
Mm-hmm.
that you're immune to that. It's the same with just the moment. I think they say the minute you think that you're impervious to
Yeah.
cheating is when you could be at a weak point and fall into
Yeah.
a trap.
And I think that's true with any temptation. And I think that
Mhm.
helps us to be gracious to others. If you're the kind of person who says, I could never be addicted to painkillers, why are these druggies immoral? If you've
Mhm.
never been in that situation where you're in a terrible accident and the doctor gives you something and then you just cannot get off of it, I think we all need to realize, yeah, it goes back to that. What's the saying, like, there, but for the grace of God, go I? You know,
Yeah.
that there we all have pitfalls, and I think the pitfalls are different for different people. Like some people genetically and constitutionally are less likely to become addicted to something, right? So there is some of that, but nobody is immune to all temptation. And I think just about every human does have some type of breaking point or some type of Achilles heel. And so when you look at a Christian or even a non-Christian who is struggling with the sin that you couldn't even picture yourself falling into its trap, A, maybe you've just never been in that situation. Or B, maybe you're never going to become a bank robber, but maybe you are like the greediest, most discontent person with a horrible sin of coveting. And so I think it also helps us just to be gracious when we see some of the more visible sins to remind ourselves in some of these sins to be like, I would never want to do that. Okay, I doubt that like they woke up at 10 years old and we're like, I hope that one day I can sit in jail for doing this terrible crime.
Yeah.
There's compassion to be had there for sure. And yeah, this sense of any of us can fall. And so we need to be praying for each other. We need to be praying against temptation, that lead us not into temptation. And I think, again, that kind of goes back to let me do no harm. I think they're similar parallel prayers. All right, let's look. So, verse 18, she sees that her trading is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. The only thing I want to say about that is, again, it's not a commandment that we need to skimp out on sleep. It's just, in my opinion, it is an observation that a mom who needs to stay up to work or to take care of a sick kid or something like that, she's going to. But I don't think it means that we're lazy if we get 8 hours of sleep a night or more.
No, and sometimes to be more productive, you need to prioritize sleep. You can get more
Absolutely.
done. Our son in college has gotten to the point where I think he realizes I need this amount of sleep. And if I
Mm-hmm.
stay up until 1 a.m. and I have to get up at 5:45 every night, I will be overall half as efficient as I would be if I went to bed at 11:30 or midnight
Yeah.
and got a little bit extra sleep, and then I can get more done in a condensed amount of time. The other thing about this passage, though, is I actually read that because I read this as her lamp does not go out at night. She stays up, she burns the midnight oil. That's what
Mm-hmm.
that's. But I was just reading that for in biblical times, for people that could afford it, they had a lamp. And if they had enough oil, enough money to buy oil, they did have one lamp in the house because it was pitch black otherwise, like a
Mm-hmm.
nightlight that would stay
Mm-hmm.
burning through the night if they
Mm-hmm.
could afford it. And so
Yeah.
it's piggybacking off of her trading is profitable so that she
Yeah.
can provide for her family in the
Mm-hmm.
darkness, which you can look at as a
Yeah.
metaphor too. If you look at it as a
Mm-hmm.
metaphor of protecting your family from darkness, I feel like
Yeah,
we
I
could
love that.
dig deeper into the spiritual implications and take care of yourself and your mental health and your spiritual health and your physical health so that you can be that candle burning the midnight oil, being always ready, always
Mm-hmm.
vigilant to provide light for your family in the form of being a prayer warrior and seeing
Yeah.
that that would like maybe just be vigilant, that you can see the struggles that they're facing, that you can anticipate, that you can spend time with God and ask him to reveal what your
Mm-hmm.
family needs prayer for, even if they're not forthcoming or even know what they need prayer for at that moment.
Yeah. No, I love that. Anything else you want to add, or we getting close to wrapping it up for the day?
I guess we can wrap it up. Are we going to move on to 19 next week? Is
Totally
that
up
what
to
we're going to
you.
do?
Is there more that you wanted to say about spindles
I
and
don't know. I mean, it,
distaff?
it just says in her hand she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. To me, like the first thing that comes to my mind is she's multitasking. She's
Oh, I like that.
doing
Yeah.
like she's got one hand on this and another hand on this, or that she does everything that she does, maybe almost the opposite. She's completely focused on her task.
Mhm.
Maybe that's more what it is. She's making sure that she is fully engaged with the task at hand. And she is doing it with diligence and with focus and intentionality. I like
Yeah.
that too. Either way,
I
I could
love
go either way with it.
right? I love the ability of moms to multitask. Like, I thought nothing of it, but I look back, there were times where, like, I learned how to walk while nursing my baby, even when he wasn't like newborn size. And I would basically hold the seat of his pants and just like he'd be attached. So, like, I would get one kid up on the toilet doing potty training while I'm like holding my nursing baby or like by the back of his pants. And
Right.
you just do what you do. And again, I don't think this is a come on, ladies, if you're not doing all of these things, why aren't you superwoman? I think it truly is, ladies, we have all been created to be the superwoman when life calls us to it. I like the idea of her lamp does not go out at night. I always pictured that meaning that she's up and giving up on sleep, but it could
Me
just mean, yeah,
too. It was
she's ready for
just in looking
anything.
at this
Yeah.
passage, I just doing this
Yeah.
episode is when I just looked into that and thought that was interesting.
Yeah, or that idea of the candle in the window means that
Mm.
here's a home you can stop at if you need to.
Ooh, I love that. That's such another element, like being
Yeah,
hospitable and
yeah,
open to others even
yeah.
while
And as
being
women, like
power.
we are able to to do those things. We are able to nurse a baby and potty train another or things like that. And there is a superwoman feel to our multitasking ability when life calls us to it. And I don't think we need to go and make those jobs for ourselves, kind of like you tried to do with the egg McMuffin. We don't need to go out and prove that we're superwoman. Like, because when the occasions call for it, we will rise to do what needs to get done. Amen. All righty. Thanks everybody for joining us. And we will be excited to see you next time when we talk more about the prayer life of the Proverbs 31 woman.